Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the read-off of deleted content. This portion, everything that you've been going through in the book has all been taking place on the planet of Nocturne. This portion of deleted content takes place on the world, which was briefly mentioned in a previous chapter where Ganon had met Aaliyah. He says that I'm from the world, and he points to the sky. Well, this is the world, and that's all we know it as. The world has no name. Her born identity. A low hum reverberated through the dimly lit yellow corridors of the industrial complex, deep in the restricted zone of equator. Pipes and conduits, from as slim as a finger to as thick as an arm, others immensely large, channeled their way in all directions. From down the corridor, in a rhythmic beat, a mechanical pounding found its way to fill every space of the confined stretch. 2 distant strikes, and then silence. 2 more distant strikes, and then silence. And so on it went. A stream of condensing steam quietly hissed as it escaped through a riveted union at one of the corners in the hall, and through the cloud, an onyx crown of feathers drifted lightly by. However lightly Giseldra glided along, the man behind her stomped heavily, and once catching up, he made his apologies. Sorry for the tardiness, Eldra. He was in the middle of throwing on a lab coat over his broad shoulders. You know the board. He straightened his coat and pulled a set of blacked-out goggles over his eyes, readjusting the clipped quills on his head. No need to apologize, Bourne. They've been pulling more red tape around the project for months. Actually, the 2 of them turned another corner to head down a set of stairs, and the dim lighting turned a shade of red. I was able to get them to cut a little bit off, he smiled, and it carried it through his whistle. You have? Giseldra turned her head to look at Dredgeborn with surprise as he kept walking. Which is going to have a direct impact on today's test. They stopped at a glass door, and on the other side, a billowing cloud of steam erupted to douse the area. Then the doors slid open for them to walk inside. How so? Giseldra asked, fully intrigued. We can skip tests 3 and 4. Directly to test 5! Exactly. The door slid shut, and again a cloud of steam doused the area, and them as well. To the left of the glass door sat a hatch that unlocked from the other side and pulled back. As the 2 of them exited the minimum sanitation booth, the hatch noisily shut behind them. Through one last hall and down another security door, they emerged and into Dredgeborn's lab, surrounded by a bustling workforce of lab coats. 2 hours passed as Dredgeborn and the lab crew rearranged the facilities, tearing down the setup for Test 3 and making way for Test 5. Eldra, on the other hand, was doing what she came to do, hand-selecting a batch of crew to stay over from the previous test to monitor the next test. But due to the accelerated timetable, she had to make a big decision on this one. She had not had much time to see the workers in their duties, no time really to gauge their abilities. In her left eye, Omni-Eye flashed as she sifted through their duty roster. Based on previous accolades, she marked only 7 people for further clearance on the project. She then callously marked the rest for exile and exited Omni-Eye. Bourne, Eldra called out. Let's talk in your office. Up a flight of stairs, Bourne's office was an overlook to see out across the entire facility, a long box lined with windows. Eldra stood looking out of one of those windows from the office for a couple minutes while Bourne reorganized his desk to make room for conversation. Please, he said, have a seat. Giseldra turned away from the window and strode across to the desk, and she took her seat, crossed her long, slender legs. Are you sure the crew can handle jumping straight to Test 5? Something she should have asked before assigning anyone to exile, but it was done. I am more than confident that any of them can get the test right. He watched Eldra ease into her chair at his confidence. The last 3 tests, you know, and you know it too, were just government overreach. Eldra nodded. I agree. Needless. And we lost Primorana due to test 2. Not through any mishap of the project, but because of the test itself. Badly designed by armchair scientists, no understanding of what's really going on here. Born, her omni-eye engaged as she cut herself short. Frowning, having just become comfortable, Eldra stood back up and walked back over to the window. If they had a real understanding of what we were doing here, on the facility floor, from the far end of the area, a darkly clothed group entered and began to fan out through the different workspaces. Cries and a commotion rang out on the floor, but gags and black bags put a quick end to it as 23 people were marched out of the facility. We wouldn't be able to do it at all. The lights of the facility dimmed and went out and were replaced by a deep green glow. Bourne and Eldra, still in the office, felt the tingle of atmostasis crawling along their scaly skin. The feathers on Eldra's head crackled with static. On the floor, the rest of the crew wore full suits of highly visible material with shielding helmets and respirators. The facility had 7 workstations set up in an L-shaped pattern with a cylindrical containment booth made from acrylic and steel off-center and in the crook of the L. The booth stood as high as Bourne's overlook on the second-tier catwalk, where a conveyor system hoisted along a large box. The box came to rest adjacent to the booth, and the system turned 90 degrees to line up with a hatch at the top of the box. With a hiss of hydraulics releasing, the box opened, tilted, and a fully grown wolf slipped out to slam down on the floor. The wolf tried to holler out, but a thick and insidious collar around its neck gave him the jolt of his life every time he tried. All that came out was a squeezed and choked pathetic yelp. Still, that did not stop him from trying, and he snarled and bit at the acrylic windows. A scratchy voice sounded on the floor as Bourne gave the order from above. "Bring in the test subject." 2 of the crew left their stations to head up the catwalk, while the other 5 rigged the containment booth with a cable that took 2 to lift, and the last 3 to seal. Above, on the catwalk, Brianti and Dula made their way to a series of hanging cages that held people, naked, frightened, some drugged. But it was one of the sober ones that they pulled from the cage, and after locking it back up to keep the rest inside, they escorted him to a hatch on the ceiling of the booth. With a mechanical squelch that made the test subject jump, the ceiling swiveled around to reveal a different hatch on the opposite side. Through the acrylic, he could see a harness fit for a person, suspended above the animal, and he began to panic. "Wait," he pleaded. "Shut it," Dula replied with a fist in the man's gut. "Bira, get the hatch, will ya? I got this frijad." He grabbed the cowering man and pulled him in close as the hatch opened. "You're getting better than what you deserve, if you ask me." From behind, Baranti pulled out the harness and began suiting the person up. "If this works, you're gonna get a new lease on life, Frijad." Dula pushed the man back and into the hatch. He began swinging around frantically, and the wolf turned his attention on him, and the man screamed. But as soon as the hatch was closed up, not a sound could be heard. "Clear the booth," Bourne ordered. "Panjoti, congratulations on this promotion. You are to be lead of the remainder of the project. I don't want to have to get involved from here on out, understood?" On the floor, Panjoti turned and saluted up to the office, then returned her attention back to her station. "Gorlo, ready the Neurotron. Mondavi, get ready to activate the synaptophragm. On my mark." In the booth, the wolf did everything it could to grab at the dangling man above. While coming off the catwalk, Dula and Beranti took up their stations as Panjoti called out to them. "Dula, how is the test subject?" Panjoti would not take her eyes off the instruments. "His readings are all over the place." The wolf jumped up and leapt from the wall, and it grabbed a hold of the harness, and the man in his harness went swinging wildly around and around. "The test subject is secure. Beranti, start the timer and linking sequence now." "Sequence started. Gorlo, 5 seconds to neurohop. Mark. Neurotron active." Beranti chimed in. "The link is stabilizing. Mondavi, 5 seconds to synapse swap. Mark. Synaptophragm online." A flash of light came from the booth along with muted howls from both wolf and man. "Subject has been defragged." The light died away from the booth with the wolf lying on the ground and the man hanging unconscious in the harness, still swinging around. The wolf was the first to come around, and as it looked around, its demeanor was completely different. Then the man awoke, and he instantly became as violent as could be, snarling around in the harness trying to break free. Gears began to turn in Giseldra's head. Years later, Giseldra stormed back and forth on the catwalk, her black-eyed glare fixed on Bourne and her feathers seriously ruffled. "What are you saying? You won't continue with the project?" "Eldra," Bourne pleaded, "try to understand. This is wrong." She turned from pacing and marched right up to Bourne, pressing her nose to his, and Bourne stumbled backwards with his back pressed against the hatch. "I have come too close to returning to eternity to let your sense of morality get in the way." She grabbed him by the throat and yanked him away from the hatch. Caught completely off guard, Bourne stressed to squeeze anything past the choking grip as he flung around. He grabbed her wrist and twisted her hand away, freeing his throat. "Eldra!" he coughed. "Have you gone insane?" Giseldra turned and opened the hatch. Bourne should have used that time to get away, but he was still in shock at her actions, and he became scared when she turned on him again. He stumbled backwards against the catwalk railing, and as he lost balance, Giseldra grabbed him once more. She turned on all her weight to throw him around herself and toss him into the hatch. "No!" he pleaded, but he was cut silent as the hatch closed. Giseldra, full of anger and thinking of only one thing, her return to eternity. She made her way down to the floor level to find a hazard suit. The gears turned in her head, and the gears turned on the hatch as the box rolled its way down the catwalk. Bourne pounded on the glass as the box opened up, and he turned his back up against the glass. A lioness, drugged and with a swollen belly, dropped into the compartment. The flash of neural hop and the zap of synapse swap, and the transfer was complete. Giseldra strode up to the booth as she removed the helmet of her suit, and she watched as the long mechanical arm entered the booth. It produced a set of needles that dripped, and it aimed for Bourne as his unconscious body lay sprawled out. They plunged into his neck, and a lethal injection took its course. But it was the lioness that Giseldra smiled at as it came around. It slowly inspected what it could of itself, and then its eyes took on a mournful look, and it looked to Giseldra. Fright and betrayal washed over her feline features as she struggled to stand under the weight of her belly. Then, the look of pain as she roared with the start of labor. The birth of the cubs was silent, though that was because Giseldra watched on from the other side of the glass. And that is how Lariel was born. But how she came to meet Azra is a whole other story filled with animal experimentation and horrors that I simply do not wish to write about. And that is that. Alright, what just happened? It's even hard for me to explain. I haven't really revisited this in detail in a long time. I dragged it out for this reading. I glanced through it. I was like, okay, yeah, this will be good to put up. So I hope people will like this. Do you remember the first chapter? Azra and the little cub, the cub that fell into Azra's jail cell? This was that little cub being born. The little cub has Dredgeborn's brain in it. Food for thought. Thank you for checking out the deleted content. I really appreciate it. We're going to continue on next week with the next chapter of the book. Thank you for all of you the handful of people who are watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this story, hit the like button on all the chapters, share all the chapters, comment on all the chapters. It really helps. See you guys.